Greetings of the day, learners. I am Dr. Shamali Mandal and I am back with the third lecture of my 11th module. In my third lecture, I will be dealing with folkloristics and I will be talking about the prominent folklorist we have, okay, who has given us folklore as a discipline and also has enhanced the folklore studies. So, I'll be starting my lecture now and the first person I'll be talking about is Stith Thompson. Stith Thompson is a trailblazer in the subject of folkloristics and his contributions are significantly influenced the discipline. The Motive Index of Folk Literature, a massive 6-volume reference that catalogues narrative motifs, repeated story element found in folk tales from civilizations all over the world, was his most significant work. An indispensable resource for folklorists, this index offered a methodical framework for contrasting and evaluating tales from various traditions. Additionally, Thompson added a far greater variety of tales from Europe, Asia and the Americas to the Arne Thompson Tale Type Index, which was first created by Antti Arne. His changes turned into the Arne Thompson Uther Index, a thorough classification scheme that is still in use today. Thompson stressed a comparative and multidisciplinary approach to the study of oral narratives in his seminal book, The Folktale, combining ideas from literature, psychology and anthropology. I have already talked, a bit about Arne Thompson in my previous lecture, in lecture 1 actually. But now I will be giving you the detail of how Thompson gave us the various motives, a few actually, and how that actually helped in studying the morphology of the folktale. 7 categories are used by the Arne Thompson Uther Tale Type Index, called the ATU Index, to categorize story plots. A set of numbers is allocated to each category. For instance, the tales of magic are a part of the tale type 300 till 749. All tale types in the index are prefaced with either AT or ATU to indicate whether they are original tale or they are in the index. For example, from 1 to 299 we have the animal tales. From 300 to 749 we have the tales of magic. From 750 to 849 we have the religious tales. From 850 to 999 we have the realistic tales. From 1000 to 1199 we have the tales of the stupid ogre. From 1200 to 1999 we have the anecdotes and jokes. And from 2000 to 2399 we have the formula tales. This is according to the index which was there in 2004. The index actually we can say it kind of is modified a bit, because what Arne Thompson gave us and what the modifications happen gives us a better understanding of the motives of the folk tales. Each ATU index entry contains the tale type, the title type actually, the summary of plot, the motive references, the other tale types with which it is often combined, the comments and the bibliography of relevant scholarship. Next, I am going to talk about the very prominent Vladimir Propp. Propp's method of analyzing fairy tales can be compared to that brand of linguistic structuralism which thrives on formalistic thought and ignores semantics in favor of syntax. This method pays exclusive attention to the rules that govern the construction of statements of any tale. Propp stresses the need to describe a given folkloric phenomenon before anyone is tempted to discover the origin of that phenomenon, and also the phenomenon has been described. Propp's main work was about the Russian folk tales, and he collected them, he analyzed them and gave us several motives, according to which we can characterize a folk tale. For example, we have the characters of the protagonist, that is the hero, the villain, that is the antagonist, the plot we have and the other characters we have. He gave us actually, the similar to Thomson, he gave us motive index of how we can further understand a folk tale. Propp also, in his morphology of folk tale, he tries to show us how 100 different tales are in fact variations of the one and same underlying structure. But the question arises as to how one and the same structure is possible if in some fairy tales we have characters who play important roles, a prince, a fairy, a queen, and who are yet wholly absent from others. For explaining these questions, Propp works out an analytical approach which he calls morphological. It means a description of the tale according to its component parts, and he then gives us the relation of those components as a part or as a whole. The component parts imply such elements of fairy tales which remain same everywhere and therefore constants, unlike the elements which change from one tale to another tale. So, what Propp gave us is like we have the constants and we have the variables. So, sometimes the constants we can say are the similar plots we have and the similar characters we have, and the variables we can say are the elements which are introduced in every folk tale to give it a different essence. For example, when we talk about the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and we talk about the Cinderella. Also, we have the Sleeping Beauty. So, what we see here? We see here that there is a damsel in distress, right? Be it Cinderella, be it the Sleeping Beauty, or be it, the Seven Dwarfs story. Okay? But what we find is, the characters, there are some characters which changes. For example, in Sleeping Beauty, the prince is the hero, we can say, the one who saves actually. Another, in Cinderella and the Seven Dwarfs, we can say the inclusion of the Seven Dwarfs, which is not there in the Sleeping Beauty, adds an essence to the story. Similarly, we have other folk tales where some of the elements, as I said, have been introduced, some have been deducted, and it has made them a bit different in essence, but more or less the storyline somewhat remains the same. It is to be noted that before the method of Propp became popular, folklore analysis was mainly guided by these variables. Propp holds that it is not characters, dramatis personae, but their constant actions or functions that form the basic elements or the component parts of tales. However, all actions do not qualify to become functions or constant elements. Only those elements which have implication in the progress of the plots of the tale are to be regarded as such. So, Propp devises a method by which one can study the tales according to the functions of the characters. The functions means the dramatis persona. Thus, function becomes the basic classificatory and analytical unit. Thus, we can see that dramatis personae are variables and their functions constant. From this, Propp drew the inference that a tale often attributes identical actions of various personages. Therefore, a tale can be studied, accordingly. And Propp studied celebrated collection of 100 Russian fairy tale and found 31 functions that can account for the totality of the data of 100 tales or the entire genre. He arranges these 31 morphological elements in a structure called the A to Z and delineated in terms of his sequence and therefore sometimes called syntagmatic or given analytic schema. Propp's method of analysis also pays attention to the govern, the construction of statements, which is only typical of a formalist. We should remember Vladimir Propp was a formalist. He belonged to the school of formalism. By doing so, he ignored the fact that there is no language which can be deduced from syntax. For understanding of traditions, morphology, unless ethnographic observation comes, becomes useless, and then it helps to fertilize it. Propp's formalist dichotomy, which distinguishes between form and content, defining them antithetically, is not imposed by the true nature of things, but by the accidental choice he has made for a realm where only form remains while content is abundant. Propp's method of analysis also does not address the questions as to why they are created, how they survive, and they get perpetuated. However, Propp's analysis tells us very clearly about the building blocks of tales, the finite nature and the conditions under which they operate. It also tells us about the universality of the folklore structure. As I gave you the example of Cinderella, right, the Sleeping Beauty and the others, that they are universal. Their plot line, as I said, the damsel in distress, they have a similar plot line, which makes it, relatable, and the people throughout the world are reading them and are able to apply Propp's method of the morphology of the folktale. Clearly, structural analysis is not an end, rather it is an beginning, but the form must ultimately be related to the culture or cultures. For example, he does not tell us why tales are created in the first place, what functions they perform, but he gives us the building blocks and he groups and regroups in different tales. And finally, why it is that in some cultures some building blocks seem more important than the others. For example, Propp does not say that the last function is a wedding indicate, okay, that Russian fairy tale structure has something to do with marriage. Also, Propp says in his function 1 that one of the members of the family is absent from home, and ends finally with the formation of a new family, that is function 31. Whether it is so or not, there is no reason in theory why the syntagmatic structure of folk tales cannot be meaningfully related to other aspects of culture. However, even Propp's model helps us to understand meaning. The sheer fact that some elements are present in some folk tales and absent in other explain that some elements are important and some are not. So, though Propp has given us a considerable understanding and the way to understand folklore or folktale, he also has his own shortcomings of not giving importance to certain aspects of the folktale which the later folklorists took in accordance. Before coming to the folkloristic scene of the Indian context, I will inform you, or I can say I will tell you about the brief history of how folkloristic became a discipline in India. One of the key sources for aesthetic non-Aryanism was folkloristics. The emergence of folkloristics in colonial South Asia dated from the second half of the 19th century and was intimately tied to a general emergence of ethnography during that period. As David Ludden points out, after the 1857 rebellion, British attempts to know India emphasized ethnography rather than the study of classical text. This new administrative interest in ethnography produced a rich archive made up of gazetteers and settlement reports and quasi-official journals and monographs authored by colonial civil servants. Folklore and ethnography are difficult to parse apart in archive. Not until the emergence of figures like Radcliffe Brown and Malinowski in the interwar period were folklore and ethnography definitely separated. By then, a new domain of the folk had long been in public view, and we have the distinct classical, modern and the urban. Bengali and indeed South Asian elites generally had begun developing an interest in this folk domain in the last decade of the 19th century. Coming to the major exponents, I will be talking about the great Abanindranath Tagore, whose photo I have attached here. Abanindranath Tagore of the illustrious Tagore family took in his hands of reviving the folk culture of Bengal. He was extremely well read. He wrote books imbibing the folk culture of Bengal and gave us the prolific Banglar Broto, which means the vows which are followed in Bengal by the married, the unmarried women for, fulfilling their duties in the society. Tagore have portrayed the scenes of Bengal, animals and birds, houses, postures and customs which are drawn like pictures, some like puppets, some like stories and some like plays. At the same time, he has also discovered many elements of society and civilization in the rhymes. As Rabindranath remarked, various fragments of the social history of that time are hidden in the folk rhymes, and his words echo in Abanindranath Tagore's words. He categorized rhymes and said that rhymes are of two types. There are some rhymes that have a connection with reality, and the second type of rhymes is that which roam in the realm of the unreal. His advice is that with the help of these rhymes, children literature and also not only the discussion of rhymes, he throws light on various aspects of folk culture such as vows, fairy tales, and has also been seen to be involved in discussions on folk art. In various articles of his Bageshwari Shilpo Prabandhavali published in 1941, he has thrown light on folk art. These articles include Shilper Socholota o Ocholota, Antorbahir, Shilpobritti, Osundor, Aryan and non-Aryan Shilpo. In the article Shilper Socholota or Ocholota, he has raised the issue of pot. And in the article Antorbahir, he has praised the art of the primitive inhabitants. And in the article Shilpobritti means how we should view folk, he has discussed as an example how the childhood state of art is captured even in the forgotten rhymes. His main point is probably that in the heart of Aryan art, the soul of non-Aryan art is hidden like a seed. We may be able to extract it, and if it had been removed from the beginning, Aryan civilization would certainly have been fruitless. He also used various elements of folk literature and culture in various books such as Shakuntala, Nalok, Rajkahini, Buro Angla, Khirer Putul. Tagore had a strange ability to paint pictures with words, and all those abilities seem to bloom in these works. These books prove that he had a special attraction to fairy tales in particular. For example, the description of the very first part of Khirer Putul. Khirer Putul means a doll made up of sweets, and we have the story of the Duorani and the Shuorani. The Duorani and the Shuorani are the two queens of a king, okay, and very much like the folk tales we have, it is, you can say, the jealousy, the competition between the two queens, and which give the essence, we can say, of the folk tale. Shuorani lives in the seven palace house. 700 maids serve her, wash her feet. She wears a robe and ties her hair. And Duorani is a great queen. The king sees her great disrespect and care with poisonous eyes. On the description of Nalok, it is said that Queen Maya Devi is sleeping on a golden couch, an open roof in front of the house and a garden beyond it, a city and a monastery. There was a king of the world, King Dushyanto. And he believes also that in the various popular beliefs, traditions, tribal tribes, folk vehicles, proverbs, folk arts, folk deities, that all can be found in the book of his own. Coming to the most prominent work which I mentioned, Banglar Brotokotha or the Vows of Bengal. It's a fascinating literary work that explores the rich tapestry of Bengal's oral traditions and folk customs, especially those related to women's religious observances called brotos. These brotos were ceremonial vows frequently made by women in rural Bengal for the sake of their family's welfare, their own financial success, or the satisfaction of their own desires. A Brotokatha, a mythological or ethical story told throughout the ceremony, was recited in conjunction with each recital. With great cultural awareness and creative vision, Abanindranath gathered and told these tales, conserving the oral tradition that had been passed down through the ages but was rarely documented in writing. His writing captures not only the devotional spirit and superstitious beliefs woven into these customs, but also the poetic beauty and symbolism of rural Bengali life. By documenting these tales, he elevated the everyday practices of women into a culturally significant art form, blending folklore, spirituality, and storytelling. Banglar Brotokatha remains a vital record of Bengal's intangible cultural heritage and reflects Tagore's broader mission of reviving and celebrating Indian traditions during a time of colonial influence. The art form found in the folk tradition, which had been held in contempt by modern art connoisseurs proud of their Western lifestyle, was unveiled by Tagore in front of our eyes. He made the reader aware of the hidden treasures and structures of drama that are ingrained in the rituals observed. Also, he kind of gives us the clarified, the spirit of the alpona, which are the decorative designs painted on auspicious occasions in Shubochinoni duck, and also, the khuntilota, the vine ladder, through the ethnographic analysis of the art. Abanindranath unveiled the enchanting glory of the festivals of rural Bengal so tenderly that was there no limit to wonder. He compared the primordial expressions of communities from around the world with the local art forms of Bengal. He linked the beliefs deep-seated in the ritual and its manifestations in the field of art together in a single thread. We should remember that along with Rabindranath Tagore, Abanindranath Tagore was also a part of the Indian nationalism and a part of the Swadeshi movement. He gave us the picture, we can say, of the Bharat Mata, and as a true connoisseur of his art, he took forward the folk culture of Bengal and is considered to be one of the most prominent folklorists we ever have. He was the art connoisseur, as I said, Abanindranath, and he discerned the immeasurable strength of the folk culture. Next, I am going to talk about another prominent folklorist of Bengal named Dakshinaranjan Mitra Majumdar. He gave us books called the Thakurma Jhuli, which is, you can say, the tales of the grandmother. Also, he gave us Thakurdar Thole, which is also, the tales of the grandfather, and he delved into the folk culture of Bengal and gave us amazing stories and folk tales of, Bengal, and also you can kind of read it in a broader perspective. He was an important contributor, as I said, to the preservation of Bengal's rich oral storytelling tradition. He was born in Bangladesh and he was fascinated by the fairy tales and folk tales that had been passed through down the years, primarily orally. He started gathering the stories from rural Bengal and turning them into writing form, and his best known book, I said, Thakurma Jhuli in 1907 included a number of classic stories full of magic, adventure and moral lessons, and it became a mainstay of Bengali children's literature. The book was introduced by Rabindranath Tagore himself, and the illustrations by the author himself was praised for its realism and poetic use of the storytelling of Bengal. With subsequent collections that captured the creativity and cadence of Bengali folk storytelling, including, I mentioned, Thakurdada Jhuli, Than Didi Thole, which is also you can say the grandmother version, and Dada Moshai Thole, it's also a grandfather version of tales. Mitra Mojumdar carried on his work. His efforts guaranteed the preservation of rural Bengali voices, particularly those passed down from grandparents to children to the future generations. We are in debt to Dakshinaranjan Mitra Mojumdar because he gave us the literature we needed, and we are even adept in carrying them forward. Now, I will be giving you two examples of two stories in his book, in the book Thakurma Jhuli. One is of the very famous story we have, the Lal Kamal and the Nil Kamal. Also, you can see that though I have attached, photos of the folklorist in my different slides, but here I have attached a scene actually from one of the tales of Dakshinaranjan Mitra Mojumdar. So, two princes, Lal Kamal and Nil Kamal, set out on a mission to save their sister from a wicked sorcerer in this charming story. They travel to a magical forest where they meet the Bangoma and Bangomi, the human-faced knowledgeable birds with the capacity to predict the future. These birds provide the brothers with cryptic guidance and support as they navigate dangerous situations. Bengali folklore is known for its magic realism, which serve as the backdrop for the story's themes of bravery, knowledge, and the victory of good over evil. The other story of the Shadbhai Champa, where the queen has 7 sons and a daughter. Envious of her joy, her co-wife deceived the monarch into exile and transformed her boys into champa flowers, which are fragrant flowers. While the flowers flowered peacefully in a garden, the queen, heartbroken, dwelt in sorrow. Years later, a princess named Parul, who, depending on the story, was either their sister or a complete stranger, discovered the champa flower secret. She shattered the spell and turned the brothers back into humans with the aid of supernatural creatures and her unwielding willpower. The cruel co-wife received justice when they went back to their mother. So, the tales, has the supernatural element. So, Dakshinaranjan Mitra Mojumdar's stories, from, Bangoma, Bangomi, the supernatural creatures we have. There is also other supernatural elements, for example. Like we can say, that a life getting stuck, in a rock, or you can say in a marine animal actually, or sometimes a pin on the head of a parrot transforms her. Okay, so there are many magical elements in the stories, and as I said, they give us an extensive, we can say, examples of magic realism. Next, I am going to talk about Guru Shaday Dutt, a notable Indian civil servant, folklorist and cultural revivalist, and he was instrumental in conserving and advancing Bengali folk arts and crafts. He was a member, as I said, of the ICS, and he utilized his position and power not just for administrative purposes, but also as a means of promoting and explaining Bengal's rural culture and indigenous customs, which he believed were being undermined by industrialization and colonial influence. He made many trips throughout Bengal, gathering and carefully recording folk melodies, dances, pottery, embroidered designs, and other manifestations of rural ingenuity. His most well-known endeavor was the formation of the Bongiyo Polli Sampad Samiti and the Potua Sangshad, the Folk Artist Guild, two groups devoted to the advancement and conservation of Bengali village arts. He aimed to instill a sense of national pride in these frequently disregarded customs, since he felt that India's villages held the country's spiritual and artistic core. Additionally, Dutt published a great deal in Bengali and English, and his body of work is still a vital source of research on Indian folk culture. His lifelong commitment to India's cultural past is exemplified by his collection, which we get in the Guru Shaday Museum in Kolkata. It is said that it consists of nearly 3,000 artifacts, and it has the Katha embroidery, it has the other important artifacts he collected throughout India, and he has tried to preserve them. So, we can say he is not only a folklorist in utilizing his official position, but also a great preserver of the folk culture of India. His lifelong commitment, as I said, gave us the Gurushadev Museum, and it was founded in 1963, and a significant portion of his life was devoted to gathering and conserving the many artistic manifestations, and it also has manuscripts, wood carvings, terracotta sculptures and textiles. Notable objects in the museum collection are the 16th century stone sculpture, tribal mask, and the everyday routines, religious beliefs and creative practices of Bengal's rural populations are revealed through these objects. The museum's collection of kathas, traditional embroidered quilts created from used clothing that feature elaborate design and convey stories through embroidery is one of its highlights. It also acts as a hub for folk arts teaching and research. To encourage understanding and admiration of Bengal's folk custom, it hosts workshop, exhibitions and cultural events. For scholars and artists interested, the museum is an invaluable resource based because of its dedication to conserving and celebrating the region's cultural heritage. Now, I am going to talk about another prominent Indian folklorist, namely A.K. Ramanujan. A.K. Ramanujan gave us the system and also you can say the ways how to analyze the folk tales of India. The body of Indian mythologies, as we know, is vast and varied. Indeed, the word mythology itself may not be adequate. Traditionally, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are thought to be the itihasas or chronicles that contain the narrative of a hero or heroes, and both the epics contain extremely subtle debates about ethical issues, and there are as many traditions of reading, understanding and transmitting. But we also have the folk mythologies, and in these folk mythologies there are recognizable diameters both divine and semi-divine, such as Shiv Parvati or Ram Lakshman. But they perform different functions and actions and act in episodes with very different intentions from the Puranic roles. In his study of the Malaya Madheshwara narrative, Ramanujan looks at the story of Madappa, a godly figure of southern Mysore. Madappa has to look for his parent on this earth and destroy an evil king and bring peace to his devotees. His travels and exploits in southern Mysore are the source of the names of many places in that area, making this a sacred geography, so to speak. There is a strong element of localizing here. Ramanujan proposes 4 ways of understanding the relationship between Sanskritic and folk Puranas. Both share number 1, both share major divine personalities such as Shiv, Vishnu, Surya. Number 2, the divine heroes appear in folk Puranas with different episodes and functions. Number 3, folk heroes may perform actions that are similar to those of Puranic heroes. And number 4, folk elements are local and have a regional relevance which does not have a pan-Indian recognizable element. Also with this, he has a 5th way, which is the retelling of the Puranic tale. The Sanskritized retelling of local legends may also be able, to garble events and meanings in their retellings. The divine figures, when they appear in the local milieu, are domesticated and incorporated in human bodies that sweat, stink, and as can be seen in myths and tales of villages and goddesses. This process by which the divine and the heroic figures are localized and contemporized or made immediately familiar and human to the local audience is called domestication. So, when we see our images of the the Shiv or the Parvati or Ram or Lakshman in the present time, it has been, we can say, modified and reinterpreted according to the need of the contemporary society and also according to the regional, you can say, demand. For example, the way we see Shiv in the south is a bit different. We see Shiv in the northern part of India, a bit different in the eastern part of India. They have been, as I said, kind of remodified actually according how the region demands their gods to be. The counter systems I'll talk about and their identification in the body of Indian folklore has been another important concern of Ramanujan. In the context of what he calls women tales or tales told by women or tales that are centered around women, there are contrasting viewpoints to those found in classical literature. The viewpoints of women, peasants and illiterate workers on ideal wifely behavior or concepts such as chastity offer a sort of opposition or counter to accepted classical mores. However, the relationship is not one of mutual opposition alone, but one containing subtle links which positions the classical and folk at different ends of the same continuum. An example we have is the understanding of the concept of karma, which defines individual destiny or fate. In the classical concepts, it includes actions and their consequences spread over many births, following a scheme whose logic may not be understandable to the individual. However, the good hero-heroine often has to go through sufferings without any apparent reason. These sufferings are also worked out within a single lifetime. So, the above concepts of domestication and counter systems are only two of the innovative ways of looking at collected materials proposed by Ramanujan. And also this is especially relevant in the Indian context where categories are fluid and contain mutual opposition within a complementary framework. Next, I will be talking about another important folklorist and theorist we have, G.N. Dave, who was a very prominent folklorist in the later half of the century, we can say actually the 20th century, and his analysis gives us a better understanding of the Indian folktale scenario. By emphasizing the oral traditions and cultural expressions of marginalized and tribal communities, G.N. Dave has significantly advanced the study and preservation of Indian folklore. He has underlined that folklore is an essential source of indigenous knowledge, history and identity rather than just a decorative or incidental component of culture. Dave started a comprehensive documentation of tribal folklore, myths, songs and oral narratives that had long been left out of the mainstream literary discourse by founding the Bhasha Research and Publication Center. His work challenges the dominance of written literary canons by acknowledging oral and performative traditions such as rich, autonomous modes of cultural expression. Additionally, Dave was a key figure in the Adivasi Academy in Tejgarh, and his perspective on folklore is profoundly moral and political, stemming from the belief that social fairness, linguistic diversity and cultural survival in India depend on the preservation of the oral tradition. Dave has changed folklore position in Indian academics and cultural consciousness by promoting it as a dynamic, ever-evolving body of knowledge. Now, I come to the end of my third lecture of the 11th module. And as I said, I have attempted to give you an idea of the important and prominent folklorists throughout the world, and also as our course is introducing folk literature of India, I have tried to give you the prominent folklorists in India and how their dedication and devotion have helped in the survival and the revival of the folk culture. Thank you and see you in my next lecture.